would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. My name is Robert Whitelaw, and I am the Rebel Broker. Licensed real estate broker in the state of California, member of the National Association of Realtors. But please, don't hold that against me. Welcome to it, folks. I am post-camping today. I just arrived back home after some great time with my boys up at Lake Alpine. I apologize for the lack of a show on Wednesday. I had primed the pump with 2 shows and figured I would do a quote-unquote live from Lake Alpine show, and everything conspired against me. I couldn't get nothing was working on the computer. There was no internet and there was no cell phone service anyway, which I kind of knew was going to happen, but my plan was to sneak just as far down the hill as I could till I got a signal and then try to upload the show. That just didn't happen. So apologies. What day? That would be, what was I doing? I believe I was in a boat, probably, on Lake Alpine at the time. I hope you all are doing fine. We're over the hump now. We're more than halfway through the week. We've got a couple of interesting things to pounce on here, and it's probably going to be a less formal show today, as much because I am pooped as anything else. After driving all the way down from Lake Alpine, we also did Columbia, which is a state park that's been preserved sort of in the whole late 1800s vibe, cowboy town type of vibe. And also went down to Copperopolis, which turned out to be rather disappointing. Sorry if you live in Copperopolis. From the road, from the 4, it looks like a great old-style town that might have cool old-style stuff, but you get into it, and it ends up, was built to look that way, and very recently. So it's got a nice, cool vibe, but it's not something that, if you're looking for the nostalgia thing, you might find it in the way the place is laid out, but you're not going to find it in really cool old architecture or anything like that. And yeah, you guys all know I'm a bit of a wonk. One of the things I love about real estate is different styles of architecture, how things were built, how things are built, those types of things. So the Columbia place is awesome. And of course, because I'm also a numbers wonk, I find myself in a restaurant there in Columbia asking, well, if this is a state park, does the state park folks own this and you rent it? How do you guys make money? What are the big tourist types? So I end up in this very long conversation with folks at our restaurant about how the restaurant makes money and how they're doing, because there was nobody there. Granted, we were there, I think we were there Tuesday or maybe Monday, I can't remember which. But it was dead. It was just a lot of folks who apparently very much enjoyed dressing up in the old West style, and not much else. It was me and my 3 boys, and we just kind of walked up and down the main drag there and checked the place out. Did not find any place I would jump in and invest in. And I'll tell you, I stayed at the Lake Alpine. They like to call it the Lake Alpine Resort. I'm not sure that's the right word. Lake Alpine Cabins maybe is another way to go. And I'm not sure how those guys make money. They're sure charging a good chunk of change for their cabins, and their cabins are very nice and all that other kind of wonderful stuff. But again, nobody there. And I get that I'm there in the off season. Again, had a conversation with folks that are there, and just, man, so seasonal, and really brought home to me the importance of getting to know the ground truth of any investment you're going to make to find out, what are the realities of your income here? Are you going to be able to make enough money to make it a year-round positive cash flow thing for you once everything is said and done? So, obviously they didn't crack open the books for me and show me how much they're making per month in rent or how well they did on a year-long basis. But boy, that looks like a challenge in terms of just all the stuff you have to do to keep everything going and maintained. And imagine having a property that you want to rent, but you don't want to be there. and trying to find people who can take care of the property, keep it up for you, manage the arrival and the departure of people. And the population in these areas is so small that I'll bet it's hard to even find folks to manage that stuff. So the big reminder to me was really do your homework, really figure out all the nitty gritty of how you're going to manage this property if it's an investment you want to make. But again, I didn't see anything where I loved where I was. Lake Alpine is beautiful and amazing. Had a great time tooling around on the lake. Had a great time trying to hike a little bit. For those of you who've been listening to the show for a while, you know that it'll be a year in September since I tore my tendon on my left knee, and I had kind of hoped I'd be far enough along that we could get a lot of hiking in. I'm great on flat ground, walking around, boy, but did I discover how quickly my leg isn't back to 100% by trying to hike over rocks and little cliffs and other types of things. So I still have a little ways to go, and it just blows my mind that we're creeping up on a year since the original injury. And then the reconstructive surgery was in December, so really recovering from that date, I suppose, is more accurate. But anyway, again, I apologize, walking into the weeds of my knee. So we'll step away from that and move on. As always, the best way to get in contact with me is through the website, www.therebelbroker.com. You can do a variety of different things there. If you really don't care about telling me anything, you can at least check out the show notes for today's show or any other show. I like to include links to the stories that I've discussed in this show, or anything else that might help you do your own checking on stuff that I'm trying to share with you. So feel free to check that out at www.therebelbroker.com. And of course, at the top of the page is the button to click on to go fill out the audience survey, so we can get an idea of the demographics of the folks who listen to the show. That's one of the steps I need to jump through to really make the show get on a earning basis, so that I'm out there being able to be freed up with time to offer you even more via this show and other things associated with it. So appreciate you taking time out of your day to participate in that. And finally, if you find any other extra minutes scattered through your day, head on over to iTunes or whatever tool you use to consume the show. Give us a review, some stars. That would be fantastic. That's the best way to grow the audience, is to have the audience participating more and providing more feedback on the show. Okay. Gosh, where are we? And there's kind of the thing I've been batting around in my head, the thing that was really sort of preoccupying me in the car drive on the way home. Was a conversation that I had recently with someone who is really trying to overcome their hesitation relating to jumping in and getting into real estate investment. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the show. But, it's hard to come up with single do this and you will succeed things. Life just isn't loaded with those kind of certainties, particularly when you're looking at something that has an element of risk to it, right? The idea that you make a good return on something is also kind of predicated on this idea that you're taking a greater level of risk, because if there was no level of risk, everyone would do it, right? So it's a tough one to tackle sometimes, but we'll take a few minutes later in the show and discuss it a bit and see if we at least can't get some perspective. If I can't give you some step-by-step things to do, at least I can try to help you maybe move your mindset to that next square to help you move closer to being able to achieve the things that you want to. And I while I'm always talking specifically about real estate by and large, I'm always hoping that whatever we discuss is also empowering you to take on other things in life, whether it has anything to do with real estate or not. So much of this process is sort of getting a little bit higher level of personal freedom, and real estate is a great vehicle for that. It helps if you have a passion for something. I'm passionate about real estate for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is like the architecture and seeing different houses and those kinds of things. But over the course of the year, because it'll also be a year since I moved the show over to a Monday through Friday format. And for those of you who've been listening through that, you kind of know my take. So you know what kind of gets my blood flowing when it comes to real estate, and also how the show was actually born out of an extreme frustration on how stupid the real estate business can be, based on what sort of real estate quote-unquote professionals have overlaid on top of it. But again, a topic we tend to cover here on the show pretty frequently. I think what I'll do is for a first thing that we jump into today on the show, I wanted to address a question that came up on the Facebook page from Brad. And he writes, since it's the weekend, I was slumming it by listening to Valley of the Sun podcast. They were saying that 70 to 80% of their buyers are using FHA loans. Went on to say that was inflating home prices and lifting sales volume. Now, I'll stop right there for a second. Let's sort of just bend our mind around that and realize that's what I have been talking about as a sign that we should be concerned. Why? Not because I think it's a concern, but because history has taught us we should be concerned about it, right? The last time we saw a major downturn, we were seeing very low leverage loans. In other words, folks who didn't have a lot of money in the pot or skin in the game, so to speak, in terms of what they had in there in the marketplace, in the home. So if the property went down, and in this case, since we're talking about FHA, we're talking about 3% down loans. If property values go down 5%, these folks are upside down. End of story. When folks are upside down, they make decisions differently. When they realize they're making payments on a home that is worth less than they owe, things change. Let's see. He goes on to say, this can't be sustainable. When I bought my first home in 2015, I compared FHA to conventional, and FHA cost a whole lot more in the long term, which is also true because of the mortgage insurance. Sadly, broke people rarely think about long-term costs. Are FHA loans this common? Perhaps this is just a phenomenon in the Phoenix market. Maybe you share your thoughts on a future podcast. So here we are, a future podcast, and I'm sharing. So, Brad, I already replied to you on Facebook, but to share it with the rest of the audience, I know, you know what I am not seeing is to kind of blow away my own point, is I'm not seeing an awful lot of that in my local business. I'm not seeing a lot of folks calling me who want to buy, who are going to be purchasing using FHA. I am seeing a lot of VA, though. Now, VA is 0% down. But for me, VA is a bit of an exception. I put it in a class of its own. I don't know if I should. I may be biased. I have a huge amount of respect for veterans, and I understand the reality that I am able to be, fat and free because they volunteered to make sacrifices, right? And it doesn't matter whether they were in Iraq shooting at people and getting shot at, or if they were scraping poop off of an airfield in Guam. They went where they were told to go and did what they were told to do, and that's worthy of I think our respect and at least a certain level of consideration. And I consider the VA process something that acknowledges that. So I'm not going to say we shouldn't do VA. Do I think that veterans represent a risk in terms of the overall market we've talked about? I don't. All the stats I've seen from the downturn indicated that predominantly vets did not jump into this, I'm upside down, so I'm going to abandon the commitment to my mortgage category. And that may not be, I can't quote you an article that says that, but I seem to recall at the time when we were back when the show was a once a week affair for 3 hours at a shot, one of the things we talked about were a lot of the types of loans that created our problem. And I just don't ever recall, and I'm almost sure that I recall VA loans being called out as an exception to that rule, where if you eliminated the term veteran, if you just called it a loan where someone put down 0%, then I'd be concerned. I've been concerned when we've talked about loans that are at 0% in some marketplaces. You tag veteran on there, and for whatever reason, I'm sure we all have different thoughts, I am more comfortable with that. And I'm going to be honest and say that is probably a huge amount of bias on my part in terms of the character that I assume of folks who are former military. And that even is in the face of me having met some very big jerks that are veterans, because right, they're humans like the rest of us, so they're gonna cover the gambit. So I don't know. I think I'm maybe harping on this one a little bit too much. I guess it's too late for the short version of this, but VA good. So I guess just push through that. And I think it statistically beats what we see historically with other very low leverage style mortgages, right? Where the person involved is either right at or very near the value of the property in terms of the loan. So, the fact that this is happening a lot in some marketplaces isn't ridiculously surprising to me. What I'd be interested in finding out is if that's a dramatic increase over the past couple of years. Judging by the way Brad is phrasing this, I'm guessing that it is. And if it's 70 to 80% of what's going on out there with FHA loans, I think that's a concern. So a really important piece of data for me would be what percentage overall across the country does FHA represent in terms of the loans? Well, do a Google search on that, and you're going to find something very interesting. The FHA used to create a report about their share of home purchase activity. It was called the FHA Share of Home Purchase Activity Report. It's something I actually used in my show way back, I don't know, years ago, and I've gone back to that site. I hadn't looked at this report in a very long time, but they stopped producing the report in July of 2012. Now, in searching for trying to find that data now and by some other means, I did find an article from February of 2015, so over a year ago, but this might be interesting as a reference point to try to get an idea of when across the country this trend may have started. What we find is that, quote, following several weeks of already elevated refinance activity, now this would have been February 4th of 2015, elevated refinance activity due to falling interest rates, FHA refinance applications increased 76.5%. So that's refinance. Conventional refinance, okay, I don't want to care about the refinance. FHA purchase applications were up 12.4%. despite a decrease in purchase applications in the rest of the market. So in other words, over a year ago, we saw a increase in FHA purchases as in terms of what it represent. In other words, the amount of the market that FHA owned was on the increase a year ago. The average contract interest rate for 30-year fixed-rate mortgages with conforming loan balances, the interest rates don't matter to us because that was over a year ago. But that gives us one little interesting piece of data, right? We were seeing a shift. We were seeing FHA accounting for more of the loans being written 1 year ago than previously. Now, if you dig a little bit further and do a little bit more searching, you will find a new report for FHA single-family market share. So you're not getting the entire market share. I would argue that doesn't give you quite the depth you need. I since there's an awful lot of people that are buying townhomes and condominiums, I'd wonder about that. But at least we've got this smaller piece of the data. We're going to go ahead and take a look at the trend here in a second. But before we do, let's take a quick break. We'll be back in just a second. Are you ready to jump in and start your search for your first investment property? Maybe you've decided that it's time to own your own home, or maybe you're ready to sell your home and move on to something new. No matter what your goal is, the Rebel Broker can help. That's right, aside from hosting this show, I am also the owner broker of Whitelaw & Sons Real Estate Services right here in Silicon Valley. With over 25 years experience serving Silicon Valley, Morgan Hill, San Martin, and Gilroy, I or one of my great agents can help you achieve your goals in real estate. So if you're ready to look into taking that next step towards achieving your real estate goals, point your browser at www.soldbyrobert.com. That's www.soldbyrobert.com and get in touch. Let me show you how I will earn your business and your respect. Again, that's www.soldbyrobert.com, or you can call me at 408-852-0525. California Bureau of Real Estate ID 00984-909. Welcome back, everyone. We're kind of jumping into the numbers a little bit here. I'm responding to a question that I got on the website from Brad, from Facebook, from the page on Facebook, relating to FHA loans having taken what looks like to be a big spike, at least in the Phoenix area, where anecdotally, folks were saying 70 to 80% of the loans there were FHA. Now, what I've done is I've kind of gone on a search to try to get a little context to that. What percentage of what's going on in the marketplace is being handled through FHA? Now, the the first table of data that I came across that really applied to this only covers single-family insurance. Well, let's see. So this is just insurance. So single-family insurance, yearly activity, mortgage, market share by dollar volume. And for the purchase end of things, it was 17.1% in 2015. When we break it down into quarterly numbers, they don't have 2016 numbers, but we do have the first quarter of 2016 for, let's see, FHA market share as a percent. And again, FHA single family insurance quarterly activity mortgage market share by dollar volume. So I'm guessing this is more focused on the insurance side of it. But what we have seen is in the first quarter of 2015, it was 15%. In the first quarter of 2016, it's 17.7%. Now that number did go up to 18% for the 2015 fourth quarter and then dropped down to 17.7. Refinances accounted for 9.4. So there was a drop there just towards the end of 2015. Towards the second and third quarters, there was an increase with a bit of a drop in the fourth quarter and then a bigger drop in the first quarter of 2016. Now, if we look at loan count, so FHA, single-family insurance, yearly activity, mortgage market share, we're not looking at yearly, I apologize, quarterly activity by loan count, then the numbers are a little bit more interesting in terms of sort of relative flatness with actually a slight decline. So if we look at the first quarter of 2015, it's at 19.4% for purchases and 9.3% for refinances. And in the first quarter of 2016, it's 22.1% of the market share and 12.4% of the refinance. With the same sort of trend, we see it increasing right up until the fourth quarter of 2015, or excuse me, the third quarter of 2015, and then it drops a little bit in the fourth quarter of 2015 and drops a little bit more for the first quarter of 2016. Frankly, I think kind of looking at the first quarter of 2015 to the first quarter of 2016 is a little bit more informative. That way you're not worrying about any seasonal things that might affect when FHA lenders are the most active versus the least active. So that's a pretty dramatic increase. If we go down to the next criteria here, FHA single-family insurance activity mortgage market share by loan count fiscal year. That's okay. We don't care about that one because that's, again, a year-to-year, and we don't want to fuss with that. But it's really interesting to go back and look at the percentages. In 2004, it was 7%. 5% in 2005, I'm rounding up. 2006, 5%, again rounding up. 2007, about 5%, rounding down. These are all relatively in the same ranges. Then in 2008, it just jumps, right? So we see the downturn. The only place money is happening is really with FHA. 20% in 2008, 28% in 2009, 34% in 2010, 30% in 2011, 26% in 2012, 21% in 2013. So it goes in decline, right? But then suddenly it starts to go... It peaks. Where did it peak? It peaked in 2010, then starts doing that interesting decline. In 2011, 30%, 2012, 26%, 2013, 21%, 2014, 17%. So a steady decline. Then suddenly in 2015, it jumps up to 21%. That's a little bit scary. It doesn't that, because remember, that kind of mirrors when there was the downturn in 2008 when that stuff was happening. It doesn't mirror the pre-downturn times, right? Because the numbers were extremely low there because we had the ridiculous lending everywhere, right? Where you didn't have to go FHA to find 0% loans. You didn't have to go to FHA to find 110% loans. You could do all of these other crazy style loans on stated income, which basically meant whatever numbers you made up, and you could get these loans. Well, what's interesting is I think this time around, the dynamic that we're seeing is one where when we should be concerned about the amount of skin the buyer has in the game, because that's the equation, right? We can have our own discussions about what part FHA should play, whether there should be, this entity that we ultimately are on the hook for in terms of if a loan defaults, those types of things. Because remember, there's also Fannie and Freddie, which will purchase on the secondary market a lot of these extremely risky loans that we talked about before. We've talked about in conventional lending, there is 3% lending going on, which ends up getting sold to Fannie and Freddie. There is 1% lending, which ends up getting sold to Fannie and Freddie. There is 0% lending, which ends up getting sold to Fannie and Freddie. So all of these things, we now have a different institutional way at getting these goofy loans. The only thing I haven't seen is the 110% loan. And I'm just dying for someone to point out that one. I seem to recall someone telling me a year ago that they had come across a loan for over 100% of the value of the property. I wasn't able to independently verify it, so I don't think I ever reported on it. But I'd be interested if someone's come across one. If you've come across a loan for 110% or anything over 100% on a house, I'd love to hear about that. If that's something that's starting to happen, we all need to worry a little bit. Because remember everything that goes hand in hand. I know this is tough sometimes. I've got a lot of folks who sort of check in now and then, or maybe are new listeners. But let's sort of put this pile of information together. We've already talked about how all of these really low percentage down payment or no down payment requirement loans are happening again, through means that are being facilitated differently than last time, but the end result is the same, because you end up with because who cares what bank is associated with a loan when in the end it ends up in the same place, right? Whether it was Wells Fargo or Chase or Bank of America writing these loans before, ultimately they didn't keep them. They sold them to Fannie and Freddie, right? So now there are banks that are, and FHA is obviously clearly up there in the list of terms of low down payment, 3.5%. So what we've got is a situation where the issue that was created, which was homeowners, purchasers who simply didn't have enough skin in the game to insulate themselves from a downturn. If you put 10% down on a home and property values drop 5%, well, you're still, in terms of how much, maybe not in terms of what you paid for the property, but in terms of how much you owe on the property, right? You're still okay. Property values go down 5% for anybody on this list we've discussed. 3%, 3.5%, 2%, 1%, 0%. All of those folks suddenly owe more than the home is currently worth. That's a line I really don't want us to cross again, because we saw what happened when that happened last time. And the further you get across that line, the higher the probability you get people doing things that cause bad market stuff. When people walk away from loans, bad things happen. And I can't help but wonder if it's more likely to happen earlier this time. How many people didn't ultimately end up having or came out of that? Let's say some folks who did that came out of it not really feeling like a whole lot of bad things happened to them. There was an accelerated recovery process where the 7-year thing really wasn't holding on quite as much for a lot of folks. There was a lot of folks that were seeing that getting waived. There were a lot of programs to sort of pull people out of that problem earlier. A lot of folks saw other people purchase a second home, move into that, and then stop making payments on the first home when the downturn started. Do you remember that? For those of you who've been around a really long time, you might remember that. I reported on that one extensively when it was happening. My concern is that we create circumstances that put us back in that mindset. And the scary thing is, I think we are even more likely to jump to those actions sooner than we did last time. Because people sort of decided to do it, closed their eyes, put their foot on the gas, and then opened them and realized they didn't hit anything. Nothing bad happened. They may have been saddled with some discomfort for a relatively short period of time, but there was really no repercussions from it. And I can't help thinking other folks saw that. And even some folks who might disagree with me and say, you know what, I felt like I had to do that for financial reasons, and I felt like I was very much stigmatized for a very long time. The perception of folks who are looking at you from the outside is not that you had a tough time. The perception is that you were able to not fulfill the contract that you had made on your mortgage, and you kind of came out of it okay. A lot of folks are concerned about what may happen relating to those things, but I think when people look back on it, I hear an awful lot of folks talk about how, man, you know, I wish I'd done it. You know, I mean, I stuck with mine and managed to come through on the other side eventually. But man, I'd be tons better off if I went ahead and had bought that house across the street that sold for $250,000 less than what I paid for my house. Because the bottom line is, I'd own that house and I would have made all that money back and more in profit, right? Has anyone else? I mean, maybe that's not a common conversation in a lot of neighborhoods, but I'll tell you, here in Morgan Hill, I've had those conversations with folks who can remember when a home that was their exact same floor plan was across the street and it was in foreclosure and they could have bought it for $200,000 less than what they paid for their house. Pretty crazy, huh? And I think I think there's a high probability that may be something that we see happen sooner than it did last time. You know, once you rip that Band-Aid off the first time, I think it's easier to do it the second time. So that's kind of that. We actually talked about that for a lot longer than I had planned to. So are FHA loans this common? In my marketplace, I have not seen a lot of these FHA loans. In terms of what we're seeing nationally, the numbers seem to back up that it's growing, that the number of folks doing FHA loans are growing. And there may be areas like Phoenix where it is far more common than what the current numbers are reflecting. The current numbers are reflecting the opposite of what you mentioned here in terms of statistics, in terms of it being to 70 to 80%. But I'm sure that there are pockets where it's very common. I'd love to find out why. I don't know why that would be going on more in Phoenix than a lot of other places. Or maybe this is a leading indicator. Maybe what you're sharing with me is stuff that we'll see in the stats as we move forward. I'd actually get much more concerned if we start seeing FHA loans being more than a third across the country of the loans, which, you know, anything above 33, 35%. And that would be a premier concern, because remember, one of the things we talked about a couple of weeks ago is one of the things that had me at least a little bit confident that we weren't likely to see a huge problem is because we basically need to reprime the pump, right? With these unwise loans, these loans that potentially could find folks in a mass situation of owing more than the home is worth if there's a downturn in the marketplace. And I've never really thought of what's been going on over the last year or two as really priming the pump up until, I guess, maybe about a year ago. But prior to that, I wasn't really seeing that as a primary thing. And it seems to me we would need, just because volume of sales is so low because of low inventory, my feeling has been that we'd need to prime that pump longer to create a critical mass, so to speak, of quote-unquote unwise loans. You can call them subprime, you can call them whatever you want, but the regardless of what got them there, the loans that we can identify as being in a situation where there's a higher probability that folks will owe more than the home is worth if there's just a 5% downtick in home values, I think that's a concern. So thank you, Brad, for heading over to the Facebook page. If you'd like to find the Facebook page, obviously you can go to Facebook and you can type in www.facebook.com/The Rebel Broker. You'll be taken to the show page for this show. Feel free to post any questions that you might have. I promise you I'm being a very good boy, and I'm visiting the page every day to check for questions, and I'm also doing the same thing for Google+. I'd also like to thank those of you who have subscribed to the Google Plus page. You know, to be honest, I was really kind of just putting stuff there. I check it for posts or questions or anything like that. But the number of folks who are subscribing to it, I remember the first time I looked, I had something like 70 or 80 folks subscribing, and now it's up close to 400. So thank you for that. I had no idea there were that many people even using Google Plus. I hear so little about it from other people. So thank you for that. All right, folks, thank you so much for making this show a part of your daily routine. You have no idea how much I value your time being spent, basically, letting me share with you my thoughts on real estate. And it looks like I have completely used up the time on this this discussion about Brad's question. I'll go ahead and have that less formal conversation with you maybe tomorrow about the things that get people feeling hesitant about jumping in and taking some of the risks we've talked about, or doing the things that you need to do relating to real estate. It wouldn't surprise me if that ends up being a longer conversation as well, because it really is that first hurdle. It's the number one thing, and it's the first thing that you encounter that I think stops most people from jumping in whatever they're doing. It's a common problem, I think, for all things that are aspirational, things that you really have to find the energy within yourself to pursue, because no one else is going to do it for you, right? It's you have to make it happen for yourself. So we'll talk about that a little bit tomorrow. Thanks again for listening, everybody. I'll talk to you all next time.